Hey everyone, welcome back to the Icon Contemporary Dialogue series. It is a Saturday morning here in New York, and it's actually a beautiful spring day. I was half thinking of doing this outdoors, but here I am, indoors still, in my regular spot, right below Adila Suleiman's beautiful helmet. And I will be joined today by Keshav Mahendru from FAQ Art. Nice to see him. Keshav, you're gonna. Hey Abhishek. Hey Alok, lots of people joining in. So Keshav, you will send me the request. Hey Ruby. Keshav, are you sending me the request? Let's see. And Keshav, are you joining? You're joining as FAQ, I imagine. We will be joining. There you go. And I am going to go live with Keshav. Hi there, Keshav. He's just coming in.
Hey.
Hey. All right.
This is familiar. From I was going to say a few years ago, a few months ago,
Correct.
When we did this last.
This is a coming of a full circle. Because the very first IG Live I did, and this is all post-pandemic stuff, but the very first one that I did was at Keshav's very kind invitation. And so we're all here. Just before that, a couple of very quick housekeeping comments. So next week on Icon Contemporary Dialogue series, on this IG Live series, I'll be joined by Priyanka Matthew, my dear friend and one-time Icon director. And we will be talking about some new stuff she's doing of placing art in restaurants through her new operation. So all of that next week, same time. And today, of course, it is Keshav Mahendru from FAQ Art. Now, I'm sure folks have tried to say that as one word, and
I encourage it.
So is it FAQ art or is it something else?
It's both, and that's kind of the fun of it, because it's the sort of thing one's mind only comes up with at 4 a.m, and this was one of those situations. And I was just like, you know what, I'm just going to register the domain name. This is months before my partner Poonji and I actually came together. Poonji, by the way, is the most silent of the two of us. She's the one who doesn't like to put herself out on display the way I do repeatedly. But she's the more behind the scenes person, and and so she and I had been friends for years, and we decided to come together. And when we were figuring out what to call ourselves, this was just something I had in my back pocket, and I was like, you know what, like this would be really, really cool if we can. I think it kind of fits what we're trying to do, which was a lot of different things at the time, and I'm sure we'll talk about that a little bit right now. And yeah, so that's how FAQ or FAQ art or however else you'd like to pronounce it came to be. Yeah.
So I've always marveled and admired Poonji and yourself, and please do say hello to Poonji if she's not on this call, and if you are, hey Poonji, would love to have you here. I also see Seher Naveed from Karachi is on the call, and Seher will be our guest on the 24th of April, which is a couple of weeks from now, when we are opening a solo show, a beautiful solo show of her works contained, which you can already start seeing on the gallery website. But coming back to FAQ, to Poonji and yourself, I've always been very interested in how, hey Pulak, in how Poonji is there and says hello. How people try to find a space for themselves in an ecosystem that seems quite crowded, and the very best, I think people with the very best ideas and hard work and so on, they manage to do it. They manage to make space for themselves, as you guys are doing. So tell us how it is. You told us the name happened at 4 a.m, but how did the idea of doing this come about? What are Poonji and you doing? What is different about you guys from anybody else that is in our space?
Yeah, so really quickly, a bit of backstory. I've known Poonji for about 14 or 15 years at this point, and in fact, that also pretty neatly describes our age difference. So she is a little bit older than I am.
She's the younger of the two.
She's the young. Sorry, my apologies. She's the
Correct.
younger of the two of us.
Let me point this out to you.
My apologies. So we met when I was maybe 14 or 15 years old, and I walked into Vadera Art Gallery where she was for many years. And Vadera was a mainstay for many of us art lovers in Delhi to go see cutting edge, interesting contemporary art that was happening back in the 2000s. And she was one of the fantastic people I met during that time. And she and I really stayed in touch, and a lot of our discussions had to do with where the art market was going and what could happen differently and what could be done better. And I think both of us were convinced that if and when we did something, it wasn't going to be sort of the conventional, let's open a gallery or an auction house or one of those more traditional roles, because we felt that there were a lot of good galleries already in India. There were a lot of good auction houses, and those businesses, the basic groundwork of an art world existed in India by the time she and I were looking at, what could be a possibility within the space. And all of this also kind of came together rather quickly. We've been speaking for years, actually, but I was working with my father, and she was, and she at some point decided to quit Vadera to sort of move on and do different things. And so and that's when we sort of came together and decided that a lot of what is missing in the space is collaborative, kind of functioning galleries working together, galleries working to improve, not just galleries, but also other institutions, auction houses, museums, etc., wanting to improve, but there just not being enough service providers in the space that would help them get there. There wasn't enough good advice, experienced advice, and with experience, that's Poonji. With 14 or 15 years in the art world, at one of the best galleries in the country, that's what sort of she brought. I brought my little experience working with auction houses. In New York, I was with Paddle8, which was an online auction house for a long time. And my interest was what the future of the art market was, how the internet and a lot of these different things, the blockchain, etc., were affecting it and changing it, and how was the art world transforming. So it was sort of an interesting mix. We knew that we came from very different places and brought a lot of different experiences. So we really wanted to work with a lot of the institutions in the space, galleries, auction houses, artists, collectors, public-private collections, to help them navigate sort of this more international space that the art world has become now. There's a lot more variables that go into how do you build an artist's career going forward? Do you participate in art fairs? Which art fairs do you participate? There's a whole bunch of questions, but and so in a not so nutshell answer, that's kind of what we do.
Who are your clients? By the way, hey Fatima. Fatima just joined us from Abu Dhabi. Who are your main clients? Are your clients galleries? Are your clients collectors? Are your clients both? Are you on the buy side primarily? Are you on the sell side primarily? What's your
actually
hire you to do what?
All of the above and more. So a lot of what we're doing, like for instance, we worked with galleries that are international galleries that are trying to make moves in India, that are trying to sort of build a market for their artists in India. That's one sort of thing that we've done. We worked with galleries in India that want to have more of a presence outside of India and build markets for their artists there, working with them. Galleries within India who've been around for a decade at times, and at that point, at that inflection point where they're figuring out what's next for us, like keeping in mind their history and where they've come from, figuring out where they're trying to go. And our approach is a super humble one, where we sort of come in and ask a lot of questions. It's not the sort of thing where we come in and we're like, this is wrong, we need to fix this, we need to fix this. It's more of a, let's understand where we've come from, what the journey is and where we're trying to go, and how we can plug ourselves in or other people in to get you there sooner, and get you there in a way that's more systematic and thought through. Because I think most owner operators and most galleries in India and most businesses, art businesses in India or institutions, are passion projects. They started out, it was often started by collectors, artists, with a real mission in mind. And somewhere along the way, I think looking back, people started to question that and maybe lose sight of that in the day-to-day grind of things in running a business or an institution in art. So a lot of it is working with them to kind of re-engage them with that and help them along the way to kind of get where they were either originally trying to go, or if there's a new vision, figuring that out.
So the one thing that everything that you're saying is quite abstract, is quite dematerialized, and in some sense, um, that is also a direction in which I think art has been going for a long time, but is continuing to go. And the pandemic. We'll get to things like NFTs maybe in just a second. But do you see, firstly, do you see some fundamental differences that the pandemic would cause to our business? So, for instance, one very quick question: what do you think is going to happen to art fairs? Now, I'm not asking this with any right answer in mind or any agenda in mind. I will be joined in May, in mid-May, by Ellie Clark from the Armory Show. I'm hoping someone from, maybe Jaya or someone else from India Art Fair can join later. I would love to keep talking. Art Dubai is going on right now. I would kind of love to know this basic congregant model, the model that allows or encourages people to congregate, that had so started to dominate. Even some of your experience in India was working for European galleries whose only physical presence is at the India Art Fair, European, German, whatever galleries that would be there. And so this congregant model, suddenly in this world of Zoom and Instagram Live, you start questioning whether you need to incur like tens, if not hundreds of thousands of dollars of expense, of shipping, of flying here and there. So what do you think is going to happen to art collecting, art showing, art buying after the pandemic? Will it remain exactly the same? Will it change? What do you think is going to happen?
I think it's a very, very interesting question, and I think a lot of people in the last year and for many years before that, especially in the Indian market, have been familiar with buying art without seeing it, online, in online auctions or through emails and galleries and things like that. But I think a lot of even people who are very comfortable doing that are very comfortable doing it with the sort of art they already know and understand. So it's easy to do that for me when I know an artist's work and I see it online. I know I have a rough approximation of what a Zarina Hashmi print will feel like in person, even if I haven't seen the specific example that I'm.
That's sorry to interrupt, but that is only for a few artists. This is not for everyone.
I'm getting to that. So I think therein is, I think, something very interesting, which is that I feel like the internet is very good. The internet and buying online is very good for buying stuff that you're already familiar with. I think when a lot of us buy new art for the first time, art we haven't encountered or seen before, and a lot of us have done that, myself included, in the last year, I think people are understanding that there's a difference between the experience of it online and the experience of a work of art in person. And I feel that's where art fairs are still crucial and are going to play an important role. That a lot of what you're doing at an art fair is discovering new work. It is about encountering art that you haven't seen before, and encountering an image of it is very different from encountering, a work of art physically in person. And I see this as somebody who buys art online regularly. There is a marked difference. Like even today, when I'm bidding online on an auction, 9 out of 10 times I'm going to hit the auction house up before that and ask them to send me 20 other pictures, installation images, maybe a video of the work of art, zooming in, all of that, because it's very, very difficult to substitute the real experience of a physical work of art. I mean, digital works of art is a completely different story, and we'll get to that. But as long as we're talking about physical works of art, there is something about seeing these things in person, and I don't think that's going to go away. So to answer your question, I think auction houses, art fairs are something that that are going to stick around. They might become sparser. They might become smaller events. I don't know exactly what shift they're going to undergo, but I mean, a classic example of that in Delhi right now, a few weeks ago, when the art fair would have happened, typically, four of the major contemporary art primary market galleries in India, Experimenter, Vadera, Chemold, and Nature Mort, came together to essentially do a mini fair, like show new works of artists on a platform called On Site at the Bikaner House in Delhi, and it was pretty successful. People came out. People traveled from Bombay to come see the work, and I think people crave that. People crave that engagement. You should have seen the collectors congregating together with their masks on in the outdoor cafe that they built, and like it felt like all the dynamics that exist in an art fair existed there. There were the more important collectors, and there were the less ones, and all of that was playing out as well.
Some of it is just revenge, because for a year you've been locked out. Some of it, I think, is just when you pop a pill, your fever drains. It doesn't mean that the fundamentals have changed. It just means that right now you're taking care of the symptoms. No, I mean, listen, I'm not a votary for one direction or the other. I'm just curious, and especially for someone like yourself and Poonji, you guys don't have a gallery and gallery staff and the lights, and so you have obviously thought of a space within the ecosystem which is already dematerialized, where you bring value not necessarily through the physical handoff or transaction, but you bring value outside of that. And I'm wondering that if this is the direction in which much else will go, and art fairs especially. As I said, Art Dubai is happening right now. I think we'll begin to get some feedback on it in the next several weeks. I know that the Armory show showed some brilliant timing and some brilliant foresight by being the only fair, I think, in the world that did not have to cancel because their 2020 edition happened and ended just before the lockdown, and then their 2021 edition is happening in the fall, so they went a year and a half. But I'm very curious to see. Now, we probably should be moving on. We're about at the halfway point, and we had promised to talk about digital art, digital consumption of art, especially non-fungible tokens. So yeah, what's going on with that? What do you think? Is this a momentary thing that will disappear, or is this here to stay? What constitutes good NFT? As you know, again, there is a sort of rich versus poor divide here, because there is a fairly considerable cost to mining and creating that token. And if the work of art is very expensive, if it's millions of dollars, then relatively speaking, that mining cost is modest. It doesn't matter. But for less expensive works of art, the mining costs could well be more than the cost of the art. So do you know of platforms where the token can be created inexpensively? Anyway, the floor is yours. Tell me what you think.
I'll be honest with you. I'm coming at it from a slightly different angle. I'm not in the least going to claim to be an NFT expert, because I am not. But
damn, I was hoping you would say that.
And how could I be? I mean, the first time I heard about the term was maybe a month and a half, 2 months ago, right? And maybe less than that. But what's fascinating about it, what fascinated me was I've always been very, very interested in how the internet and technology was interfacing with the art world. And a lot of my research while I was still in college was focused on digital art and how I felt, and back then I was a true believer, I truly felt that this was the revolution that the art world was waiting for, because I had this whole model in my head about how if art is valuable because of scarcity, clearly there's, like being an economics student, there's also a sweet spot somewhere lower down that spectrum of very, very scarce to multiples, where you can, for $10, $15, have many, many multiples that you can sell to many, many people, and art can be more accessible and all of that. And, this was a time when Netflix was big, and Netflix was getting bigger and bigger in the States, and internet speeds were getting super fast. We were at that cusp where online streaming was so simple and so easy and so effortless that it really felt like a moment where digital art, and especially digital media, so video-based art, time-based work, which digital is specifically pretty good at handling. I thought that was kind of the moment, that it was going to happen. And there were organizations like Sedition Art that worked with Damien Hirst, Barty Care, Matt Collinshaw, Michael Craig Martin, some of the biggest names, Elton Green and Dad Set, and you name it, Yoko Ono. And, they worked with these guys to make these digital works of art. There were editions of, anywhere from 500 to 5,000, and you could buy it for anywhere from $10 to 100 or $200, depending on, and the price went up as the edition sold out. And it was completely digital. Like you'd pay those $10 or $15, and essentially you'd get a watermark-free streaming service for that work of art, and you get a digital authenticity certificate with the edition number that you had purchased. And theoretically, when the edition sold out, you would be able to resell it if you wanted to, for whatever price you wanted to quote, or I think they had sort of an exchange model in mind once an edition sold out. So it was a very fascinating space, and this was all 7 or 8 years ago. I mean, we had people like, and the people involved with it were very serious. They had serious clout in the art world. Some of them had been the people who were the YBA's gallerists. So Tracy Emin was part of this as well. And it was a very interesting sort of time to be looking at digital art, because all of these things were happening. And there were many, many companies that had come up with many different models, subscription models, etc., that you could do this. So what was interesting was that the vision of digital art back then was that it would make art accessible. It would make art something that everyone could partake in and purchase and have on their phones and laptops. We were all walking around with 5 or 6 screens at that point, right?
Right.
So what's interesting to see is that with this melding of this crypto world, and really I think this is, in my mind, much less an art story as it is sort of a cryptocurrency blockchain investment story to a large extent. I mean, even the person who's spent $69 odd million on the people work that Christie sold already had a portfolio of many, many NFTs before that. So, you know, one can try to understand it in terms of almost price rigging or price setting. You know, like when you spend $70 million on one NFT, what does that do for the price of many other NFTs? Suddenly you've created this ripple, and so many more people are interested in it, and people are suddenly asking about it and talking about it and trying to do stuff with it, which is honestly not something we're unfamiliar with in the art world as well, right? Where people do amass large quantities of an artist's work, and very often are the ones bidding them up at auction when they do come up for sale. So
or hedging.
Sorry,
so this could be somebody who also made their money in crypto, and the 70 million that they're spending because they have to spend through cryptocurrency is not actually their inbound sort of cost, if you will. Their landed cost is not 70 million.
Exactly.
Their investment might have been much smaller, which has gone up over time. Absolutely. But nonetheless, I mean, one shouldn't think of it necessarily only as that, because the 70 million or 69 million is something that they could have done something else with. And clearly there is an element of, there are several elements, right? There's an element of what, if any, will be the taxation protocol. There is clearly not the regular shipping and insurance. You know, nobody's going to actually run this over with a forklift truck while waiting to put it on a truck or something like that. So it's a very interesting set of
Actually, I think the taxation protocol is a very interesting thing to talk about, because that was one of the major points of the crypto movement of the last decade or so, right? Like you create a system outside of the monetary system that already exists. So a lot of cryptocurrencies, a lot of that information is actually not with governments. Governments don't know how much crypto an average person might have, and it becomes taxable when you convert it into US dollars or another currency. That's when that amount becomes this crazy thing. So I mean, again, I'm no crypto expert. I think that is a key part of what people are talking about, that the taxation side of it. You know, a lot of this is happening in a sphere that's outside of those usual norms of art buying. For instance, the tax on art. You're absolutely right. There is no shipping cost. There's no insurance. There's no physical space. There's no storage space that this work of art is taking up. But more importantly, you're also not buying the work of art when you buy an NFT. An NFT, it stands for non-fungible token, is really saying that it's essentially like getting an authenticity certificate for a work of art, but not the work of art.
You're almost like buying the authenticity certificate without actually buying the art.
Exactly.
The art is the image typically inside of an authenticity certificate. You're basically, absolutely, because anybody else could have an identical image, an identical moving image, an identical anything without that certificate of authenticity. And the
So
only thing that
exactly.
distinguishes you, this is a good way of thinking about it. Sorry,
But
go ahead.
I think there's an interesting distinction there, right? Because this is where it's very different from the art world, right? When you own a physical work of art, you own it. It's not with the artist anymore. You take it home with you. The artist might have image rights to it, and actually, artists should exploit that because they could make NFTs out of the images of their works of art as well. So, and I'm sure that that's something we're going to see more of going forward. But you take a physical work of art away from someone when you
Correct.
buy a physical work of art. That is not happening here.
Correct.
The artist still owns the rights to the image. They can still reproduce the image. They can still print T-shirts and make mugs and propagate it on YouTube and on Spotify if it's a song. A lot of that is still there. What you are
So
essentially buying
in that's true in also other works of art. So if you if you buy a Warhol original, which itself would be an edition, the natural copyright still resides with Warhol or his successor entity, whatever his estate is, and they can still print mugs and T-shirts and things like that. And this is true for the sort of the natural copyright still resides, and natural copyright typically will cover reproduction rights. That
absolutely
unless you have written a contract at the time of buying
when you
that
hand it over.
specifically prohibits the artist from doing that. The artist can still continue to reproduce, but I think even in materiality, if there's oil on canvas, take a Hussein limited edition print. If the original was a canvas or watercolor, that has, because that's what the image came from. But
Right.
here, that is also not there. The image is the image. It's a
Yeah.
digital image. The copy is the same as the. Is anybody doing this that you know of in our world, in the Indian art world?
I'm pretty sure there are many people figuring ways out to kind of get on the NFT bandwagon. I know a couple of years ago already, we had a lot of people working on the blockchain, on the intersection of blockchain and art in India. I know of at least a couple of people who were trying to do things in that space. And really what they were trying to do that, and that is a key part that is relevant to the NFT as well, is they were trying to essentially use the blockchain as a ledger which is what it essentially is, to capture provenance, to capture who owns a physical work of art, which is what a lot of the blockchain efforts in the art world were initially geared towards, not towards NFT. But what's happening with the NFT is, and what makes the NFT interesting is that it is essentially that, but completely, as you said, dematerialized, where all it is recording is that this NFT is owned by X person. So going forward, and I think what people are also betting on is that in the deep future, in the distant future, that blockchain is going to be, the distributed ledger of the blockchain is going to be how we keep these records of ownership, of how things exchange hands, because it is in effect the most permanent record we have. Because it is distributed on many systems. It's not centralized. It's not in one place. So you can't destroy the records, and you can't destroy one computer which holds this information and it all goes away. It's distributed. It's on many different location sites, all of that. So there's a greater chance for that information to survive, almost too good a chance for that information to survive in the future. So that's what the blockchain really does. It gives you sort of this permanent record of the chain of ownership if it changes hands, or ownership if you bought something sort of fresh. And that's where sort of blockchain and NFT is also kind of interesting.
But you don't know, you're not immediately aware of I would say in the South Asian space also. I mean, I was talking to Hugo on this very channel the last couple of weeks, and we also kind of briefly floated this idea. He thought of a work by Jitesh. I also thought of Rashid. But I mean, really, there are several artists who can quite easily, like for instance, anybody that has an element of time in it. So for instance, I was thinking Iranna, who I show as, a lot of his works, like the ash works, the works with incense, they kind of change, they morph as the incense burns, and it basically, and any minute you capture, you're like stepping into a different river, if you will.
Sure.
And you know, there are others. There's a filmmaker called Ashish Avikuntak that I show, who
Right.
also lends, because these are all capturing moments. So I've been wondering if there are folks that are doing this, and what will be, because the first selection, the first of those works will have to be like super clever, and it's an interesting challenge.
Yeah, I think it is definitely interesting. And India, in South Asia, we're lucky that we've had a lot of artists since the early 2000s, if not late 90s, who've been working with digital media even, and time-based art specifically over the last sort of 2 decades. So I think there's a huge body of work that could potentially sort of service that kind of demand. But I think what's also interesting over here is that a lot of like I think Ranveer Kaleka's work, for instance, and a lot of other stuff like that. But what's, again, taking Ranveer Kaleka's example, these are artists who are very, very conscious about how they want their art to be seen as well, right? And how they want it to be experienced, and other things. And I feel like that is part of where, if they can figure it out in their heads how NFT fits into that, that could be something. I think it's not just about time-based work. I think you could do it with a print. You could do it with anything. That's sort of the beauty of an NFT, that anything can become an NFT, really. So it's really not even dependent on it being a digital work of art, or a work of art that's time-based, or a work of art that's created digitally. It could be anything, really. I think that's sort of the part that boggles my mind, and something that I'd love to also figure out a bit more as we get deeper into this.
Anyway, it sounds like we will have to pause here because it's a little after time. I've been trying to keep these things pretty tight for a half hour. It's 11:32. So, but it's wonderful. It's wonderful to speak with you again, and perhaps we can let a couple of months pass, and maybe in the middle of summer come back together and see where things are at. These things that we're
with a bit
discussing.
more hindsight.
Yeah, we'll have a little more hindsight. I think it'll still be early days, but it will have a little bit more hindsight. So,
fantastic.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. I wanted to.
Folks are saying it was great. They enjoyed it. It'll be on our Instagram channel, which is Aicon Contemporary. Now, I think already we are into our third dozen. So this is the 25th to the 26th in the series, and have had some really, really engaging and interesting conversations. So folks, please check this out. Please post, repost, etc. In your case, Keshav, we can work with you. I think if you want to repost this in its entirety, you will have to get the file and so on, but we can figure that out. So thanks, everyone. I'll be back next week with Priyanka, as I said. And last week it was Hugo Y, and you can get all that, including this conversation that I had with Keshav on our Instagram channel at Icon Contemporary. Thanks, Keshav, and thank you very much. Have a great rest of the weekend. See you soon.
Right.